Hi everybody, welcome back to Bentley House. I'm Ara and today we are working in the abandoned coffee shop. Now this is going to be the beginning of a 3-part series where I'm wrapping up all the things I need to do in the coffee shop, and we're starting with this countertop, which has been pretty bare for quite a while. I have a long list of ideas and things I want to do. I'm just going to start making as much as I can and just dividing it up into 3 videos, and so this is the first of those 3. So to start off, I went over to my miniature collections and I started pulling out some items that I think will work on this countertop and fulfill some of those ideas that I got from going to the coffee shop in my last video. In that video, I made this little cash register, and then I went to a real-life coffee shop to get a bunch of ideas. One thing I'm ready to do is glue in this toaster. After kind of pulling out a bunch of miniatures, I have decided I want to put it underneath that cat clock. And I had a lot of ideas that you guys gave me for like a little cake stand, but I found this basket, and because I do plan to set this in like a very small town type of a scene, I thought it would be really nice to have a basket of treats instead of like a formal cake stand. So I'm going to use this little metal basket miniature, and then I do feel like there might be some fake flowers sitting near the register, something trying to pretty up the shop a little bit. And I did create a coffee pot that goes into the coffee maker off to the left, but I wanted to have another coffee looking jug. This could have possibly contained coffee or maybe even cream, which I was thinking about cream. And I just dropped the lid behind the counter, which takes me about 10 minutes to get out later, but we'll skip that on this video, so you don't have to watch me struggle with that. I also found this little muffin tin and these plates, and I figured she probably would have some plates sitting around, so I'm going to make a little stack of dishes that she plans to do. Obviously the sink's really small, so there will be a stack of dishes somewhere, and a sponge. And I realize I just said she. Yes, our main character in the story of the coffee shop is going to be a female, so stay tuned for that. Also, I wanted to make sure I did a tip jar, and so this I will be creating as the tip jar, and I'm putting it behind the cash register for now, but I will be coming back to that miniature. It's not quite ready to be glued down yet. Now I do have a lot of sweet type foods that are in the little display case below, but I did figure there would be somewhere sitting around a salt and pepper shaker in case she did bring in like some quiche or something, so people would have an option to have some kind of spice on their food. And these I did not make. These miniatures that I'm putting down now are all miniatures that I did not make myself. This little journal and pin set that you're seeing now is one I've had in my collection for a while, and I do figure that any kind of shopkeeper would have something like this sitting around to keep notes. I love this little pin. It is like a little piece of wire with a couple beads on it, and I will show you a closer view of the journal coming up, but I still had the paper saying that this was made by the Lone Star Miniature Club of Austin, and I thought it was really well done, so I'm excited to add that to the coffee shop. So now it's time to do the scariest part of miniatures, which is glue stuff down. So I decided I wanted the cash register right next to the little display case. That seemed to make the most sense to me. And this little flower thing was, I'm not quite sure where I got it, but it's a little bead with flowers in it, and I thought it made a really interesting pot. So whoever actually made that, that was a really cool idea. This little basket is actually a metal miniature, I think I said, and so I like that because I'm not scared that I'm going to be smushing the handle that's sticking up, so it'll stay sticking up. And then in the future I do want to put a little cord for the toaster. Now this journal seems to be fairly simply made. It looks like it was a printout and then folded over some paper, and I was thinking I'd make a separate little label to put on top, but then I was like, no, if this is kind of a small town shop, someone could have very well gotten a journal and decided to cross out the word journal and write sales. So I just kind of went ahead with that detail. It made it easier on myself, one less step, and also gave a little bit of interest, I think. And then also I did some handwriting for the tip jar. I did think about printing that out, but when I think of a tip jar, usually it's got a poorly written label and it is taped onto a jar. Just when I imagine a tip jar, that's what I see in my head. And so I took some thinly cut pieces of tape and just added the tape detail to either side of the paper that says tips. Now these are some little coins just made out of polymer clay that's been chopped finely. Now they could be a little bit smaller, but honestly, once I put the gunk inside the tip jar, I don't think you're really going to notice the size, and so I didn't worry about it too much. I'm taking some watered down brown and black paint and I'm just adding that to the coins to make it look like years of rainwater and dirt has kind of built up in there. Then I'm going to take some UV resin, carefully drop it into the tip jar, and then I'm going to cure that with a UV light to make it look like the water has just kind of stayed inside the tip jar. This is going to encase the coins so there's no risk for them coming out, and then it gives it kind of this murky water look, and I really don't think anyone's going to look in there and say, hey, those coins are too big or don't have enough detail. I think it just gives that feeling of some coins that have just been sitting in murky water for a very long time. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and glue it behind the cash register. I think that makes the most sense for a place for a tip jar. And now that everything that I want on this counter is pretty much in place, except for something that I'll make in a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and age everything in place. Remember, when you're making something abandoned, you need the items to correlate with where they are sitting. So for example, on the journal, that journal is going to soak up a lot of water, and so all the area on the wood countertop around it is going to be stained from all that water sitting and just being concentrated in that area. Now for the little basket, I wanted to make sure it looked like something was still in the basket. I planned to cover it with some cloth, but I didn't want it to look like it was empty. So I cut the heads off of Q-tips a lot. And so in order to reuse those and not to have to make, because you're not going to see what's in there, so I just decided to use the Q-tips to make some lumpy, bumpy bits in the basket. So this is the fabric pattern that I chose, and I'm doing my draping technique, and I will link the video in the iCard if you do want to check out how I do my draping and what I dip it into. And this just allows me to move the fabric around to where I want it to be, and I'm just going to put some pins and some sculpting tools to hold it in place until it dries, because it still wants to flip up. But I just want it to stay there until it dries, and then I know that the fabric will stay exactly where I want it to be. Then of course I need to go back and age that as well, because that fabric has been, of course, seen some water damage, and it's going to also have some moldy food underneath it. So here's the view from the side. You can still see the basket texture. Now, one thing I knew I wanted to make specifically for this project was one of those little spiky things that you see people, once the order's been filled, they take the receipt that the order was written on and then they put it down over the spike. I don't know what that's called, but I'm sure somebody might know and leave me in the comments what it's called. I'm just going to call it the receipt spike. But what I've done here is I've just taken some circles, I cut them out. I did 3 just to make the thickness that I wanted, and I'm going to glue those together and just let that dry. And then I'm going to take a little sewing pin and something that I can poke into, because I want to poke the sewing pin through the circle. Now my circle's not super nice and neat, but it's all going to be aged and covered up with receipts anyway, so I'm not worrying about it too much. If you've been part of my channel for long, you know that perfection is not something that we do here. So we just keep going until we like how it looks. So now I'm going to take some gel super glue. I'm going to put it on the needle and then slide that piece of paper up until I have the spike the length that I like it. Now before I cut off the rest of the pin, I'm going to paint that piece so that it looks like metal. First I'm using some dark gray, and then once that dries I'm going to put some metallic silver on top of it. This is how I do all of my metal pieces that I want to look like it's made out of some kind of silver type metal. Once that's dry, I can go ahead and take some wire cutters, and on the underside I'm just going to cut through it. And this was a little tougher than I thought. Sewing pins are pretty tough suckers, so I ended up having to try several times to cut through it, and then I just bent it back and forth until the top came off. Now you could probably use a tack for this as well, but I didn't have one of those, so I had to make it myself. Now what you see me doing now is I'm cutting into some vellum paper. I have vellum because I used it in another project, and it's kind of this really thin see-through paper, and I thought it would be perfect for receipts. Now it's kind of expensive, so I wouldn't go buy it just to make these tiny little receipts, but I just happened to have some, and so it worked perfectly for this. Now I'm tearing the pieces here instead of cutting them, because usually when a receipt comes out of a machine it's just torn off instead of cut straight, and so that's why I'm not worrying about that too much. And also, as most of you know, over time receipts, the ink on the receipt tends to disappear, so I'm not even worrying about making it look like anything has been printed on these receipts, because they will have water damage, and so I imagine that just nothing would be seen on these receipts at all. So I'm going back and forth with some watered down black paint, some watered down brown paint, and once I've done one layer I'm going to add some more receipts on top. Just I'm just going to add it until I like the amount of paper that is billowing over the edge of this receipt spike. So here's what mine ends up looking like, and I did go back and kind of flip some of the edges over to look like it's been matted down by the rain. And when I went to put it next to the cash register, I realized that it was completely blending in with the colors of the countertop, and that's because I use a lot of similar colors in this project. So my idea to help it stand out was to put another little extra sheet of paper, like someone had just been saving it, underneath the cash register, so that it did give a little bit of contrast, so that the receipt spike just stood out a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and age this paper. I'm trying not to age it too much because, again, I'm using the same colors. I do want it to look like it's been there for years, but I also still want it to have enough of the white showing through so it gives me that contrast that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that down, and it's just slightly peeking out underneath my cash register. And then I'm going to add glue to the bottom of my receipt spike and then glue him on top of the piece of paper. I think this is a great example of how miniatures really are an art form. You have to think about contrast as well in a miniature piece, just like a painting, so that all your details and the things you want people to notice stand out in your work. I also decided to add a little receipt to the journal. I felt like, anyone who was trying to keep track might have put one in there that wasn't entered into the sales journal yet, so I just stuck that guy into the cover. So now I'm ready to move on to the long-awaited, much suggested light switch. And I don't know why I've put this off for so long, but it's a fairly simple way to make a light switch. It's similar to the way I made my, well, it's not super similar, but kind of similar to the way that I made the outlet covers, and I will link that video if you're interested in seeing how I made those. This is a even simpler way to make a light switch, and so I'm using 16th inch thick mat board, and once I've cut it to the size, I'm just going to bevel the edges, and then to make the little center switch area, I'm going to push down with my X-Acto knife. I'm not even trying to pull the X-Acto knife to make the cut. I'm just stabbing it through the mat board because the hole is so small that if I try to cut it, I'm going to end up cutting a slice that's too big. And so I'm just kind of pushing the blade through the mat board until I get the hole size that I want. So now I'm going to go ahead and use that same center piece, or if that center piece kind of gets ruined in the process, make another tiny little sliver of mat board, and I'm going to put some glue in the hole. And I actually think I ended up putting too much glue because you can't really see that it's actually a hole in there. So I might play with that the next time that I make one. But I'm going to insert this piece kind of sticking out, and you can either, make the switch up or down. I decided to leave the switch up, but you can also change that when you go to install it. Just, install it upside down if you want the switch to be down. I'm also going to take a ballpoint pen and I'm going to push into the mat board at the top and the bottom just to make a little indentation for where the screws will be. Now my ballpoint pen made a mark, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to go back over and paint it. And I should have done a little bit of a thinner layer so that it didn't cover up as much of the detail, but just keep in mind, the more paint and the more stuff you put on this, the less detail you're going to see. So now I'm installing it into the coffee shop right next to the phone. There's wires coming out of the wall at the top there, even though you can't see. So I figured that'd be the perfect place for my little light switch. And I'm just using my same watered down acrylic paint to add in some aging detail. So the next thing we're going to be working on is an apron, and I love this suggestion. I can't remember who it was, but thank you. An apron with a rusty name tag. So that's what we're going to be using, and I have my little 12th scale model here so I can make sure that I'm getting the size of the apron correct. And I'm just going to use a pencil to mark out a rough looking apron. Remember, everything in here is going to be looking rough, and so I'm not too particular about making a very nice piece of clothing because it's just going to end up ripped up and messed up in the end. So I'm pretty happy with the size that came out here, and I'm not going to be making edges or anything because I'm going to be using the fact that it doesn't have finished edges to make the edges look a little bit more frayed, especially after years of just being out in the open. Now I'm adding a little neck piece. This is just a little piece of that same fabric that I cut really thin, and I do realize that the neck piece does look too small to go over the head of the person that I had there earlier. And honestly, I don't understand aprons. Either the head thing is too small or too big, so I go back and fix that in a second. But I add little side pieces that could be tied around the back, and then my solution for the neck piece ended up being that I was just going to cut the piece in half, because I do find that aprons that allow you to tie the thing around your neck fit a lot better in general, but then of course you have that knot on your neck and it gives you a headache, and aprons are just complicated in real life. This one wasn't too complicated. But there you go, I'm just going to cut it in half, and then I have 4 straps. And why do I have to go into this much detail for a miniature apron that's no one's wearing? I don't know, but it's the curse of the miniaturist, right? So now I'm going to be making a pocket for the apron, just adding a little bit more interest to the front of it, especially because it's just going to be draped. I want to give my viewer, whoever's looking at this item, enough information for them to put together that it is an apron. So I'm going to add a small pocket, and I'm going to just hem the sides of it because that's what's going to help it stand out against the original piece of fabric. And I also made the stripes go horizontally so that it didn't blend in too much with the other fabric. So now I'm just going to glue that down, and that should be the end of my apron. And I left it so that it's a pocket at the top if I do decide I want to slip something in there, some kind of clue as to the backstory of the former owner of this apron. I haven't quite decided yet. And then I am going to snip into the apron just a little bit. This will help me kind of age it. I want to do this before I'm going to put this on the back of the chair. So before I drape it, I want to rough it up because it's going to be harder to do once it's on the actual chair. So here's the chair. Once again, I'm going to use my draping technique, and like I said, I linked that in the iCard if you want to check out what I mixed together to use as my draping solution. I do typically protect anything that I'm draping fabric over, but I'm not too worried about protecting this chair specifically because it's already pretty messed up. So if I do get some water damage on it, it's gonna be okay. So I'm not protecting this piece, but if you do decide to drape something on a nicer piece, you do want to protect it. Now it took a little bit of fiddling to find a position that I was happy to where it looked like someone had just thrown it onto the chair, but you could still tell that it was an apron. But in the end, I think I found a position that I like. So now I'm going to be making a little name tag, and my printer stopped working, so I made a copy of an old book page, and so I'm gonna take this name right here, and this is gonna be the name of our shop owner, Tess. And I'm using some polyacrylic on the paper to kind of seal the top of it and give it a little bit of a shine like an actual name tag. And I like the look of the old paper. It does it kind of ages the name tag without me having to do anything. And then because I want this to be kind of a metal looking name tag, I'm using a gray Sharpie to kind of go along the edges of the exposed paper and just cover up any of that white. So now I'm going to use some glue and put the name tag on the apron as if she just always leaves it on the apron, and then once she was done at the end of the day, she just draped it over the chair. So here we have Tess's name tag against the apron. And now I'm going to be using, again, some watered down paint, and of course I'm going to be using a little bit of brown and a tiny bit of orange near the name tag to make it look like the rust from the water getting onto the metal name tag has really started to infiltrate and just soak this apron. So you will see the rust, and then I will go on to age the rest of the apron, and there's not going to be any blood stains or anything, so nobody get too morbid here. It's just supposed to be an apron that was thrown on a chair and has been attacked by the elements here. And also, I just want to show you that I did remember to age the little apron strings that are going over the top of the chair on the back, even though it's fuzzy and you can't see it. I added a little bit more of a darker black color as if, you know, mold was growing underneath, and there is the finished apron on the chair. So finally, what you've probably been waiting for, I'm going to introduce you to the long-awaited resident of the coffee shop, and I did not make this guy. I found him in my collection, and I thought he was just absolutely perfect to be our coffee shop resident. And I don't remember where I got him. I don't remember who made him. So if you know the maker of this item, please leave it in the comments below so that everyone can know. But he's just looking so interested or curious, and I think he's just perfect to be sitting underneath the chair because I do think it looks like something or someone has been nesting in the chair. So we need a name for this guy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would love for him to have a name. He may be my only resident in the coffee shop. I have not decided yet, but I sure do love him, and I think it's great that he's like the cleanest thing in the coffee shop. This little rat is the cleanest thing here. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this hodgepodge, I was about to say Mod Podge, this hodgepodge of items that I've put together to continue to work on the coffee shop. Part 2 will be coming out next Friday, and I'm just going to keep working along making things until we get to the end. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!